Hi. Today we're going to talk about history. Not what happened, but why it happened. Up to this point, we've talked about power without names. We talked about systems, geography, surplus, and control. We explained how the conditions for empires were created long before anyone called themselves an emperor. But history doesn't stay abstract forever. At some point, ideas turn into structures, and structures turn into lived reality. Empires were not theories. They were places people lived inside. People were born into them, worked inside them, paid taxes inside them, and often died for them. So this is the episode where we begin the transition. Not by listing empires one by one, and not by turning this into a chronology. Instead, we start by watching the same system appear in different places under different names. When you do that, something important becomes visible. If you look at the earliest empires across the world, one thing immediately stands out. They did not copy each other. They did not communicate. There was no shared blueprint. And yet, they look strangely similar. Different languages, different gods, different rulers, but the same logic underneath. This is because empires were not inventions in the way tools are invented. They were solutions. Solutions to the same problem. How do you control large numbers of people, spread across large areas, for long periods of time? In Mesopotamia, this problem appeared along the Tigris and Euphrates. In Egypt, along the Nile. In the Indus Valley, along predictable river systems. In China, around the Yellow River. These places were not chosen because they were special in a cultural sense. They were chosen because they made control possible. Water created food. Food created surplus. Surplus allowed specialization. And specialization required organization. Once organization exists, power needs a structure to survive. The first empires were not confident. They were experiments. No one knew how much force was too much, or how much freedom was too little. Some rulers relied heavily on fear and collapsed quickly. Others were too loose and lost control. What survived was not the strongest empire, but the one that found balance. Not terror alone, but routine. Not chaos, but systems people could live inside without constant resistance. This is where we start to see something subtle, but crucial. Early empires did not rule everyone the same way. They couldn't. The center was tightly controlled. The edges were negotiated. Local elites were not removed, they were absorbed. Empires learned very early that ruling everything directly was expensive. Indirect control was cheaper, slower, and far more stable. Power became layered instead of absolute. Religion also begins to change here, not as personal belief, but as infrastructure. Gods become centralized. Rituals become standardized. Loyalty becomes moral. Obedience stops feeling temporary and starts feeling normal. This is not accidental. Empires need more than soldiers. They need meaning. People obey longer when obedience feels justified. What's striking is how fragile these early systems were. Many of the first empires collapsed quickly. Droughts, succession crises, internal revolts, and overexpansion destroyed them. But each collapse left something behind. Administrative knowledge, record-keeping, tax systems, military organization. Every failure taught the next empire how to last a little longer. And this is where we need to slow down. Because it's tempting to ask questions like, which was the first empire? Which was the greatest? Which mattered most? But those questions miss the point. What matters is not the name. What matters is the pattern. The pattern is what survives long after individual empires disappear. By the time later empires appear, something fundamental has changed. Power is no longer improvised. It is institutional. Rulers inherit systems instead of inventing them. Empires become harder to dismantle, even when leaders are weak or incompetent. The system carries itself forward. People may change at the top, but the structure remains. This is the moment when power stops being personal and becomes permanent. And once that happens, history enters a new phase. Empires are no longer fragile experiments. They become enduring machines. So this episode is not about celebrating early empires. It's about recognizing that once humans learned how to rule beyond their own communities, something irreversible happened. Power learned how to outlive people. In the next episode, we'll stop talking about beginnings and start talking about maintenance. How empires actually ruled on a daily basis. Not just through violence, but through routine, reward, and expectation. Because the most powerful empires were not the ones that terrified people the most, but the ones people stopped questioning. This isn't a story about empires. It's a story about what humans do once they have power. And now, the names will start to